Brooke Taylor, welcome back to So Money.
I'm so happy to be here. I can't wait to talk to you more.
I was joking before we were recording that it's been a book minute because last you were on, we knew you were on the road to publishing a book, and here we are just weeks away.
I know that's right. Book comes out May 26th, and it's been over 2 years since we spoke. So I've written a book in that time. I had a baby in that time. He's now one.
Oh my
Um,
gosh.
yeah, his name's Crosby. So that's been a whole
Oh, I love
other, yeah.
it.
My
Baby
husband,
Crosby.
my husband and I met on Crosby Street in Soho. So that's the name.
I love that. I love that. And I love Crosby Street. And I love Soho. And I love your book. It's called Healing the Success Wound. For those who may have missed the last time you were on So Money, take us back to identifying a success wound because you had a personal flare up with this, and then of course it inspired a book. But tell us what you mean by the success wound.
So, the success wound is the pain that comes from mistaking success, productivity, and achievement for self worth. It's a feeling like no matter how much you achieve, it never feels like enough. You're not able to hold on to the pride or the fulfillment or the satisfaction that comes from your achievements. And so, what do? You race to find more. Another promotion, another piece of validation, another piece of good feedback, another piece of another good job. And in my experience, this is a universal human experience. It's something that we all struggle with, but it especially shows up in high achievers. And there's a unique way in which it shows up in women too. But
Like,
people who have a success wound, they typically have three things in common. They had a childhood experience of feeling like no matter what they did, it was never enough in the eyes of maybe parents or caregivers. Like their worthiness of love and belonging was contingent upon what they produced, achieved, and did rather than who they are. The second is they all felt this sort of emptiness, this restlessness, irritability, and discontentedness that was only fixed through another achievement or another piece of validation. And then the third is the habit of seeking things outside of yourself to fill that empty cup feeling.
yep.
And again, in my research, I think this is a pretty universal experience, but it's the first time we have language for what it is.
Yeah. I'm right there. I'm right there. No, and it occurred to me only in working with somebody else and seeing how different we were in our working styles and how I seemingly would just go, 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 go was, you know, people would be like, wow, you're so like efficient. Wow, you're so productive. Oh my gosh, you're getting so much done. And they'd be like, we so appreciate you. And all these compliments. And I was like, it was like rolling off my back. I was like, I don't even care that people are appreciating my work. Like for me, I just need to be doing this to feel alive. Like,
Hmm.
I don't know if you've heard this too come up in your research. Like, um, I've had a hard time kind of self-diagnosing what it is about my desire to work so hard because it's not for the achievement so much. I feel like maybe for a while it was, but now I just feel like it's the only way I know how to work is to work a lot and hard and 100 miles per hour. And it could just be the conditioning. And do you find that to be sort of like the affect of not unpacking and reconciling with the success wound is like you sort of get into midlife and even though you have achieved a lot and you don't need to work as hard anymore, you still do.
Yes, because it's become an identity for you, hasn't it? Right?
Yes. Yes.
I am the get stuff done person. I'm
Yes.
the person who has two podcasts. I'm the person for whom, it's not because you love winning or approval that you're doing it. It's because I'm guessing you might not know who you are without it.
Right. Right. Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, I'll send you a therapy check in the mail.
Sure, sure.
You interviewed 5,000 women though. So talk about your research and you talked to women at very sort of, I guess I can say this, like stressful companies, high intense companies like Google, McKinsey, and you identified several types of these unfulfilled achievers, these archetypes. Can you walk us through some of them and maybe maybe I'll find myself in one of these archetypes?
Yeah, I have a hunch which one you are. So, yes, I interviewed over 5,000 women, women who work at Fortune 100 companies who identify as somebody who doubts if she can have the heights of success and the depths of fulfillment that she so desperately wants, who has a very capable brain, very smart at strategizing, problem solving, but can't seem to fix this problem, which is the problem of how to actually feel fulfilled while she's working. And so, what the data showed is that there are 5 different ways that this success wound shows up in women specifically. Now, I think this is a universal experience, but I'll talk about the difference between men and women at the end. So, the 5 types of unfulfilled achievers, the first is the grinder. This is the person who wants to have more, do more, be more. She finds her sense of value and love through how much, the volume of her productivity. Now, this is the
Mm,
person who might spin their wheels a little bit, tend to work, I don't know, maybe past the point of diminishing returns, who can't seem to kind of let go of the doing. So, this is the person who's very good individual contributor, but might have a difficult time taking a jump into leadership, for example, because they're obsessed with being the get stuff done person.
yep.
The second type is the hider. This is the most common type in my survey because I've had, I think, about 10,000 people respond to the survey at this point, and this is the most common one. This is the person who has big dreams for their career or their life, but a fear of failure or financial insecurity stops them before they can get started. Now, that might look like they're successful, at face value, but deep down, they have other dreams for their life and they're not able to activate on them. This person tends to have a bit of an avoidant attachment style. The third type is the pleaser. This is the person who's always wondering, are you mad at me? Is obsessed with their standing within workplace relationships, only feels safe when everybody's approving of them or liking them. This
Mhm.
person tends to have an anxious attachment style or maybe some social anxiety.
Yep.
Then we have the seeker. This is the person, we all have a friend like this, the person who sits either on the spectrum of career confused to full blown existential crisis, maybe in a single day. The person who's like, I know this next cleanse or this next relationship or this next project or this next job will finally be the thing. It'll be my thing that finally rescues me from my misery or my
Uh-huh.
dissatisfaction. And then we have the work hard, play hard. This is what I was when I was at Google. This is the person who wants to be the life of the boardroom and the life of the party, achieves a lot, but numbs out in unhealthy ways and calls it balance, at the end. And of course, there's no problem with it, a healthy escapism. It's more like, how does it make them feel at the end of the day? So those are the 5 types of unfulfilled achievers. And just a note on gender, most of my research has been done with women.
Mhm.
I think the success wound shows up in women so I asked this other question, which is, what is the image of the successful working person that you're maybe unconsciously comparing yourself to? So for me, it's like the effortless entrepreneur, the person whose revenue goes up and to the right quarter over quarter, is always invited onto the best podcasts and panels and rooms, and everyone wants to like celebrate her success. When I asked that of women, what their kind of success ideal is, the word that came up most often for women was the word balance. For men, it was the word provider,
Ah,
right?
yeah.
Money, power, etc.
Power.
So power. And so I say that just to say most of my research centers around women, but I think the success one shows up maybe a little bit differently in men.
Yeah. All right. So let's say you're a grinder asking for a friend. What do you do? And what is the like, tell me how that can blow up in your face. I know for the work hard, play hard, that kind of literally tells you kind of like how it can kind of you can hit a wall, right? Because you could play too hard and you could end up on your back. For the grinder, all of this is just you're going to end up on your back. You're going to end up like unwell and you're going to have to take time off and then really have to unpack all of this. Like, what is the sort of like danger, I suppose, and the warning signs of getting close to that danger.
Sure. So I think the obvious for the grinder would be the burnout or the exhaustion. But I think an underrated part of what holds the grinder back is that they're not able to get to their next level in leadership or business ownership because they're obsessed with doing the doing. Maybe they can't trust other people to do the doing because they won't do it as well as they
Right.
can.
Right.
Does that sound familiar?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes. 100%.
Uh-huh. And I
Uh-huh.
get that, right? Like I totally understand that and can relate to that myself. But there's that need to, and so that's the shadow side, right? Is like it's going to hold me back in some way, not just the exhaustion piece, but like I can't get to my next level. That's my ceiling in a way. And so for the grinder, their core belief, the thing that all of my grinder clients believe, first and foremost is that their sense of love, control, and safety comes from like the volume of work that they can produce.
Yeah.
And you asked a question at the beginning, which is like, why do I keep doing this? I think another piece of this is like our nervous systems become accustomed to operating at that level. I have,
Right.
my husband, for example, was at McKinsey for 10 years and he just left to start a drywall business, so a construction business.
Yeah.
Different vibe, different vibe. It took him a year to reset his nervous system to be like, I don't need to be in my inbox 24/7. My value comes from being present on the job site and leading my team, not my doing. So that was the shift that he had to make. And for a lot of my grinders, especially in a corporate setting who want to get to their next level out of all the doing and more to the kind of like higher picture strategy, it's like my value comes from my presence, my expertise, and trusting my being rather than just my doing. And that's
Wow.
a big mindset shift to have.
Yeah. Wow. Well, you kind of skipped over your own, I don't know what we would call it, like, breakdown,
Sure. Spiritual awakening
spiritual
breakdown.
awakening,
Yes.
breakdown, break up. Can you take us to the moment where you realized, um, I'm not okay, and I want to figure this out for myself? Before then, you started to figure it out for everybody.
Sure. I can remember it like it was yesterday, and I'm talking about it a lot, and it always, I don't know, I can remember that very clearly. I, kind of before getting to that rock bottom moment, I grew up in Silicon Valley where, intellect was king and hustle and sacrifice was queen. And you needed both of those in order to be successful. It was about money, power, and prestige. And the word ordinary was a dirty word. You had to be extraordinary in my cultural upbringing in order to feel validated. And I took that kind of gold star chasing mentality to college, to my job at Google. And by the time I was 24, I was managing $80 million in ad spend, working at YouTube with some huge brands. And I borrowed Google's brand equity as my own because I didn't know who I was without it. And I couldn't wait for people at parties or on dates to ask me what I did for work so I could tell them I worked at Google, and I could feel that sense of pride and accomplishment as a result. But deep down, I felt that emptiness, that hollowness, this sort of manic ambition, this frenzied, frantic need to succeed at all costs. So I was in this work hard, play hard cycle where I would strive Monday through Friday, and every answer to every email was a measure of my competence. And every deal that I closed felt like, a shot of vodka. It felt great. It felt like a relief, right? It felt like, oh, finally. Okay, good. And it felt like, every question that I answered was a referendum on my value as a person, such that by Friday I was so exhausted and depleted, but I would drink to numb that emptiness. And I was in this kind of work hard, play hard rat race for 4 years, but 4 years felt like 24 years. And that is all came to a screeching halt when three things happened in succession within 3 weeks of each other. The first is that I was sexually harassed by my direct manager at Google, but I didn't report it because I was up for promotion and I didn't want to rock the boat.
Wow.
I couldn't anger or embarrass or harm the very people who could give me that sense of approval, validation that I craved, because without Google, who was I? I had no idea. So I chose to protect them because there was a bit of a system there rather than protecting myself. And I knew that at the time. This was still pre-Me Too. So I didn't have all the language around like imbalance of power. And I was still kind of young, but I knew that what had happened wasn't my fault, but I still chose not to say anything. And the second thing that happened is that it became very clear that I had a problem with alcohol, yes, but I also had this addiction to approval. And both were really ruining my life. And then the third thing that happened is that my father was diagnosed with terminal blood cancer.
Wow.
And when you get that kind of diagnosis, it causes you to question. It causes you to look at how you're living your life when somebody else's life is ending, doesn't
Of
it? It
course.
causes you to ask some questions. But the fact that all three of these things happened within 3 to 5 weeks of each other, I had to throw everything out the window. I'm so grateful that all of those things happened at once because I did have to get to work to find a new way of working and relating to myself and to my job. And I was looking for answers that really bridged the gap between real business acumen and real career advice, but also deep psychological understanding with a sprinkle of spiritual development. But I
Mhm.
couldn't find an answer to that. I didn't know what this emptiness was, and I didn't know that anybody else had it. So the first thing that I did was I ended up getting sober and I went to recovery meetings. And in recovery meetings, some of the first things that you learn is that addiction, the root of addiction, it's not the alcohol. The alcohol is the solution.
Right.
Your real problem is this thing that they call a spiritual malady, which is this hole, this emptiness, this void that addicts use to treat with alcohol. But I realized that I was treating this spiritual malady, this void, with achievement and productivity and validation and significance and all of that. So I would leave these meetings and I'd be like, okay, these are addicts, these are people with problems. But then I'd go to my Google meetings and I'd be like, actually, these are addicts too.
Yeah.
And these people are addicted to the more, better, faster. And I think this might be the root of a lot of other political or leadership issues that we see today, perhaps.
Right. Right. And I think sometimes, well, speaking of like politics, people don't want to give up the roles, right? Even though we just had a conversation on this podcast about like things go past their expiration date. Like, we have an addiction to the titles and the attention that we get for the roles. I'm talking also people like in high profile jobs. Yeah. Yeah, I can totally see that. So you go to these you go to like sorry.
AA, recovery meetings.
You go to recovery meetings, AA, also therapy?
Yep, I do some therapy. I joke that this period of time is like the montage in Legally Blonde where she like buys the law books and she starts watching Judge Judy and she like kind of gets her stuff together. That was like my life, but for 3 years. Some
Yeah.
therapy, some recovery, some time off, some time with my family, a lot of reflection, research. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And yet you felt like there was a missing element to all of the support and advice and breakthroughs you were experiencing. How did you know there was something missing? What was the voice inside of you telling you?
So at Google, we were so lucky to have so many different like leadership development resources, like new manager training, or this is how you give feedback. But it was also focused on the level of behavior. 5 steps to a good one-on-one, 3 steps for coaching, 5 steps to give feedback in a better way. But behavior is the output of a system. It ignored the root cause of why do people not give feedback in the first place? Because they're too scared to anger or embarrass people. Or why are people bad managers in the first place? Because they don't have self-awareness. Even emotional intelligence literature, it focuses on how to cultivate empathy or self-awareness or flexibility, but it doesn't teach you how to deal with the negative emotions like resentment or judgment. Because I was in these rooms and getting sober, they were like, you only really have one problem, and that problem is this void. And nobody was talking about that void, but I was learning about it 3 to 5 hours a day in these meetings. And so I became obsessed with like, well, how does this void show up in work and career? This empty cup feeling, this feeling like it's never enough. It's never enough. This disease of more, that we're always chasing more. And so that's where my research centered. And then I found out, to put a finer point on it, that did you know that there's $397 billion spent a year on leadership development from companies, but it ignores the root cause of why there's poor leadership, why there's burnout, why there's perfectionism, why there's imposter syndrome in the first place. So there's all this spend, but it's not fixing the problem. What's this empty cup feeling? That's
Yeah.
what's causing the burnout. That's what's causing the imposter syndrome, the poor management, all the rest of it. So that was my question.
So pivoting a little bit to talking about success wounds and how it shows up in our financial lives. So I'm learning about how this can manifest in our work lives and in our careers, the archetypes. And this really has a lot to do, as you say, with self-worth, our sense of self-worth. This shows up a lot in financial realms, right? Whether we're talking about negotiation, whether we're talking about uh, going for the big job, the big promotion. Talk about some of the ways that you have seen success wounds get in the way of people, in particular women, as they try to earn more, make more, climb the ranks in their careers.
I think this shows up in two ways. One is, to your point, the way that we treat negotiation, raises, motions in the workplace itself and our sense of worth around that. And then I think the second way that it shows up is the way that we treat the money that we already have, the way that we invest, the way that we tend to our 401k, look at our money in or out. And so if we look at the archetypes, the pleaser tends to be the person who doesn't want to ruffle feathers or doesn't want to show up as needy, so avoids having a conversation around raise, or is all too happy to cover for a fourth maternity leave without a pay raise conversation, which I see show up a lot, by the way.
Mm.
Um, Love that women take parental leaves, of course. But in the US, because these parental leaves are so short, 3 to 6 months, 6 months at the long end, it's incumbent upon the colleague, often the woman without kids, to take on the work. And so, they're just like, sure, I'll be a team player. There's that identity again. I want to support people, but without having a necessary conversation around, okay, well, what is this going to mean for my performance review? What is this going to mean for a bonus at the end of the year? So that's how
Mhm.
it could show up for a pleaser. For a hider who tends to have more of an avoidant attachment style, this is the person who never looks at their personal finance, right? They're like, okay, I think everything's just on auto pay and auto deposit, and I'm just gonna or not on auto pay. It's
Yeah.
just, not looking at what's coming in and what's leaving. And so these are the people who tend to be like, well, I don't know. I don't know what's being deposited, or I don't know where I'm invested, or that's been on my to-do list, but I'm too scared to look. So those are some of the ways that our success wound shows up in our finances and hold us back.
And then when it comes to negotiating, do we like you mentioned in the instance of if you have an extra, but like what about like going in for a new job, and just those kinds of conversations. Um, let's say you are a grinder. What are some things to be self-aware of in those conversations? Because I feel like you might you might not recognize work overload in those cases, or I don't know, like you undervalue the amount of responsibilities that you might be thrown at you.
I find, yeah, it's grinders tend to over index on the belief that my performance will speak for itself.
Mm.
Because I'm doing so much, that should be enough, right? To get that promotion or to get that raise. So, like a very 1-to-1 ratio of, well, I've done all of these things. So they're less likely to create awareness around the work that they're doing, because again, they have the belief, well, my work should speak for itself, which of course we all know it doesn't. And they also believe that, again, the more volume equals better. So, what they need to realize again is they need to come back, and this is in the book, on like, what are my most essential priorities? What are the 3 things that I am working on this quarter? So, in a time bound space, 3 months, that are going to move the needle for the business. And again, of course, we can take on extra work and, do things, but they need to embrace the idea that done is better than perfect. And I need to be raising awareness around the work that I'm doing, and I need to only be delivering on what's most essential for the business.
Yeah, I had a job years and years ago, one of my first jobs. Luckily, I had a great mentor. And to your point, I was like young and overworking, thinking that my work was going to speak for itself. And she said, "No, no, no." This is my mentor. She said, um, everyone's just head down doing their own thing. Like, why do you think anyone's going to notice what you're doing? Um, if you want someone to recognize and this was a newsroom, so I was doing stories, they were airing on television. She said, "Here's my suggestion. The next time your story airs on TV," and we had TVs all over the newsroom, do a lap around the newsroom, do a lap in front of the news director's office, because she'll make the reference point. Like she'll see you on TV and then she'll see you in front of her office
Mm,
and then, she'll go, "Oh, hey, yeah, good job on that story," right? And if that's what you're looking for, right? Because you need that. I know you need that. And because you're not going to get it. And it's not because you're not deserving of it. It's just because people are busy and that's just not how the world works.
that's right.
I think because especially for people coming right out of high school and college, you get graded, there's marks, you know exactly where you stand all the time, but not in the real world, and so you struggle to figure out, "Where do I stand?" And, maybe if I just swim harder and faster, but no, and then you just end up collapsing. Um, as you were speaking, I'm a mom now and you're a mom, and, I definitely think that my parents, uh there was definitely a sense of, you have to earn your sort of place in our family in a way, like you have to earn our love, blah, blah, blah. Not to get to like, woo woo therapy here, but, and I don't think I'm saying anything that no one has ever experienced. But there's a lot of, like, comparison, "Why can't you be more like this kid?" and blah, blah, blah. And how do I make sure that I don't repeat these traumas with my own kids, right? I think I'm doing a pretty good job of that, but it's so deep rooted that, I would love to hear from you, and I know you have a whole sort of section of advice on parenting. How do you break these generational patterns around performance and approval?
This is the most common question that I get asked as soon as somebody who does have kids starts to create awareness around this. So, I don't have all the answers, but I do have two that seems to be satisfying for people. The first is that, when we reward intellectual based achievements, it reinforces the part of the brain that's in charge of intellect. Now, the part of the brain that's in charge of intellect is not the same part of the brain that's in charge of responding to setbacks, adversity, and resilience. So when we under reward the resilience that's required when we don't get our way,
Mm,
when we don't do well on the test, when we didn't make the team, when we didn't get into our first choice college, and on and on and on, then those kids don't have that capacity. And what I find is that in folks for whom their success wound is exceptionally strong, right? That never enough feeling, they have over indexed on the intellect and under indexed on the resilience piece. So I think rewarding the meaning making that happens when we don't get our way, that sounds almost like toddlerish, but it's like, all the disappointments that we have as kids. And the meaning making required of that. Now, kids are young and they haven't lived the long lives that you and I have to be able to be like, you can connect the dots looking backwards. And like, for example, I wanted to go to Tufts University. I didn't get in. I got into the Harvard of Canada, McGill University, a fantastic school, but it wasn't my first choice. But if I hadn't gotten into that, if I had gotten into Tufts, I wouldn't be married to my husband and my son wouldn't be here.
right,
Now, but
right.
I can tell that to my kids one day, but I think it's the meaning making of it. It's like, okay, you didn't make this team, but you made the JV team. And look at the friendships you made as a
Right,
result, right?
right.
So I think that's one thing. The second thing is that in my research and experience with my clients, they all come to a new understanding of their worth and work dependent on their archetype. So, for example, if the grinder is, I need to prove my value from how much I do, after working with me and healing the success wound and getting in touch with their intuition around this, they almost always get to a place of saying, like, my value comes from my being, not my doing. For
Mhm.
a pleaser, they usually all get to a place of like, I can care for people without carrying them.
Yeah.
And for a seeker, they get to a place of like, I my purpose isn't one thing. It's to be myself in any given situation. Now, share these specifics just to say, what if we could inculcate that in our kids from the beginning? You could care for people without carrying them, or your purpose is to be you in any given situation, or your value comes from your being, not your doing. So I think if we could reverse engineer it from that, that might help too.
I love that. You are enough. Yeah. Mhm. My daughter is, I would say she loves to help, and I wanna make sure that doesn't veer into pleaser, territory. Like little things, like when she comes up to me and she's like, "Mommy, look what I made you," or "Look what and I wanna say thank you, but also make sure that she feels good about it, right? That she's doing these things because she gains pleasure from her drawings and her projects and her helping. Like that's the most important thing. Cuz you know, um I think adults struggle with this too. This idea that like if you're going to be helpful, it's okay that you get satisfaction out of that too, right? That you don't have to be completely selfless in an
Right.
endeavor. Like it's okay if like in the act of helping someone, you also feel satisfied by that. It's gratifying to you as well. And if something doesn't feel good to you, you shouldn't do it. Um,
That's right. Yeah, there's so much nuance to this conversation, especially around pleasing, right? Because I think where pleasing veers into suffering is when it's like codependence, right? Where there's anxiety around, oh, this person didn't like me. They didn't like what I produce and therefore they don't like me, or, their mood is my responsibility, that level of, codependence. But what we find in achievers who are pleasers, who are able to kind of fill up this empty cup on their own, is that they have they care so much. They have an abundance of empathy and intuition and attunement to others. And that can be such a superpower and a strength, can't it?
yes, great point. A superpower. That's a great way to frame it. Brooke Taylor, thank you so much. I love that you turned this spiritual awakening of yours into a mission to help so many people. My goodness, 10,000 people have taken this survey. I mean, that is quite the indication of just how many people are starving for this support. Thank you so much for coming back on the show. Your book, tell us more about it. Tell us where we can find it.
Yes, the book is called Healing the Success Wound, Align Your Ambition, Find Lasting Career Fulfillment, and End the Cycle of Never Enough. Anywhere books are sold, Amazon, your local bookstore, Barnes and Noble, and it's available May 26th.
May 26th. And congrats on becoming a mom.
Thanks. Thanks. It's been awesome. He's already 13 months and I love it. I love it.